of this series 2 of The Whistleblower. My name is Ian Trent, and together with our superstar panel and special guest, we will talk all things water polo tonight. Now, speaking of our panel, it's a very good evening to the former Australian Olympic representative and men's team coach, John Fox. He's up there in Brisbane for the Masters. Foxy, good evening.
Good evening, Ian. And Gold Coast, not Brisbane, but just down the road. And I got in just after the blackout, which prevented people from checking in, and hopefully we'll still have enough power to see this episode through, because the internet's been a little bit in and out tonight, but looking forward to the show. Okay,
COVID has it's got a hold on the rest of the world. I mean, I don't know about the internet though. Joining him is water polo all-rounder, coaching, refereeing, webinar production, you name it. He's it. Good evening, Phil Bauer.
Evening, Ian. Yeah, it seems every time we put a water polo tournament on, COVID jumps up, because Danny Flav's stuck in Melbourne trying to get on a plane to go to Gold Coast. Sorry, Sunshine Gold Coast. They're playing the Masters. And it's very doubtful. I think there's 6 Victorian teams up there, and no one seems to know what's going to happen with it, whether they'll be barred from playing or not.
Okay. And because he hasn't switched himself off, and we didn't tell him to, I'm going to introduce our special guest now, Charles Turner, the Australian Water Polo High Performance Manager. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Ian. My pleasure.
Right, we'll join in when we just talk a few newsy bits and pieces in a segment we call Convoluted Drivel. And you can see that slide there. Scotty has done a wonderful job there. The news on everybody's lips, I suppose, is the naming of the women's Olympic team. Now, let's have Scotty, if you can bring that up there, and let's have a look. And gentlemen, any surprises there in your mind?
I don't think there's any surprises. They had to drop 3 players in the end out of a squad of 16. There's 7 debutants. They're going to really have to stand up, aren't they?
They really will. What did you think?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Foxy. You go.
No, thank you. No surprises with the names. What I am surprised about is these strange suburbs that are listed after their names. I would have thought maybe we could mention their clubs as just a recognition of where they're played or where they have played. But I think it's a good team. It's a very well-balanced team. I do have a question for Charlie later on relating to naming of 13 players, because I'm not sure where we're at with the 13 or 12 in the village, or do you name 13? So that's one for Charlie later.
Well, Charlie can answer it there. What about how many on the card at the Olympics, Charles?
So under the FINA rule, you can nominate 13 players, but 12 of them are squad members, and the 13th is called an alternative player, an AP player. And we have negotiated to have all of our 13 players in the Olympic Village, so all of them will be there. And you can nominate a team of 12 24 hours before the game, and that can be changed on a daily basis. So basically, you can move them in and out if you wish to.
Charlie, that's changed quite significantly since last year, where you had to name 12 and then one player stayed outside the village, and they would only be brought in to replace a player that was dropped?
Yes, there has been a change. We got the I'm not sure what the other teams are doing, but we got the AOC to agree that we could have all 13. We thought that was the best way to manage this, because we don't, at the end of the day, we're not going to discriminate against any of the players. We think the 13 are 13. So that's the way they were announced by the Olympic Committee on Monday too. So the only decision that has to be made is on each day you have to, well, I guess the night before, make a decision on who you are going to play for the next game.
You said, so the AOC's made that decision. Is that going to be consistent across all countries?
Well, I don't know. We've certainly, because we had a certain number of spots in the village, and we have taken up those spots. We will have some members of the support staff will be in the overflow accommodation, so they won't be in the village. So we won't have our whole 19 or 20 people in the village for each team, but we will have all the 13 athletes.
Charles, what happens if someone gets sick overnight? Can they then replace it like an hour before the game?
Look, it's a bit grey, to be honest with you, because we had some issues with this last week. The Olympic Committee legal area weren't too sure of the rules, and they also made mention to the fact that it hasn't really been determined how the exchange of player each day is going to work, because the IOC haven't necessarily provided the details around that. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but we understand that from the information we've got from FINA, that we can nominate somebody 24 hours before a game, and that player then is part of the 12 to play.
Right.
All right. Well, Foxy, I thoroughly agree with you that the clubs should have been acknowledged there. And, I really don't give a tinker's cuss about what suburb the girls come from, or the boys for that matter. I think a bit more concerning, and Charlie, you might comment on this as well with the boys, is that look at all those New South Wales players and not much coming out of WA. The regular Zoe Arancini, and then Queensland chip in with 3, and then Rowie Webster, who plays in New South Wales. She's, the lone Vic. I mean, for the future or whatever, I just think we need a little bit more balance in our. Not that I'm suggesting that anybody should have come in, but it's a worrying trend that New South Wales seems to dominate like that.
I think that's where we've been since the last Olympics, actually.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the next Olympics too.
Yeah, a number of West Australian girls retired, and we've got close to the best team we could possibly put there.
Oh, no doubt about that. I would have thought maybe 1 or possibly 2 are a bit unlucky, but there it is. There's our Olympic team. Let's hope they can do pretty well. Maybe should we have a look at their draw again, Scotty? Can you bring that up? I've asked him something that. Right, here we go. Charlie, what do you think about the women's draw?
Oh, I don't think it's a bad draw at all. If you compare with the men's draw, it's terrific draw. I think that the biggest unknown is the fact that they're going to be arriving in Tokyo having not played another international for 18 months to 2 years. And that's going to be the biggest concern. We really don't know. They've been playing games against some boys' teams, and they look pretty good. But all of you would be aware that in the heat of battle against another international team, they haven't been tested. So it is a bit of an unknown. But I think that on paper, you'd have to think that they're a very good chance of at least making the 4.
Yeah, so Charlie, could you just explain to the viewers how the groupings work and the crossovers?
Well, I actually haven't got the information in front of me. Sorry, Phil. But I think it's you play around in your groups, and then I'm not sure of the crossovers. I think it's the final 4, perhaps.
Yes.
Something might. Yeah, Foxy's corrected me.
Yep.
It's the final 4, and is it 1, 4, 3, 2, Foxy?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So does that make sense? So you play your round robin, top 4 from each group, and then you play off 1 in Group A will play 4 in Group B, and 2 versus 3 across groups, and 3 versus 2, and so on. And then you'll play semi-finals and finals.
Yeah. So if we took out South Africa, which I'm quite sure everyone will beat, we're going to be jostling from positions for 1 to 4.
Yeah.
Well, we should knock over Canada, but the US have been cleaning them up. And I know the US are playing a series against Hungary too. So you're right, Charlie. The girls aren't getting much, are they?
No, and look, it was a decision made collectively by our medical staff and the team. In the end, we had the opportunity to go to the United States and train with the US in July, but because they were offering the opportunity to train in Los Angeles, our medical staff felt it was too risky, and the team agreed. And unfortunately, I think at least they have been playing some games. And Pedrag's pretty philosophical. His view is that maybe they'll be able to slip in under the radar, having not played any games, and maybe surprise a few people.
Well, let's hope that occurs. While we've got the slide up, what did you think of the nightmare men's draw?
Yeah, well, I've seen better draws. But look, it is what it is. And at the end of the day, Australia will have to beat a couple of teams to get through. And once if you get through, then things become a bit easier because you are in you have an easier cross group, obviously.
All right. Well, there it is, the Olympics. And when is the men's team announced?
Men's team will be announced at the end of June, 30th of June.
Okay. End of the financial year.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's one to look out for. Now, gentlemen, the national junior teams update, which we didn't do last program. And of course, we've got a couple of junior coaches with us, Phil and Foxy. Foxy, first up, how are your boys faring in the near future?
I've got a few updates to give you. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the Born 01, 02 camp. So the Born 01s are preparing for a World Championship, which may occur this year in Argentina in August. That's when it's slated for. But whether it goes ahead or not, we're still pressing ahead with selecting a team. And Dimitri, the head coach, has chosen a team to travel to New Zealand to play in the New Zealand Championships in July. From that also, we chose a Born 02 team, which myself, I'll coach that one. And they're the boys that missed out on the World Champs last year. So they get a bit of a consolation that they'll also get a chance to play overseas in New Zealand at the New Zealand Championships in July also. Just recently, we've come off a Born 04, 5, 6 camp. So it was combined Born 04s, which have their World Champs next year. We don't know where yet, but I think it's no secret that Australia are very interested in hosting the men's or the boys and the girls for the 04s. And we also included the 05s and 6s. Obviously, with the Born 04 team, we're looking at players Born 05 who might be able to step up into that higher age group, but the 05s, 06 are an independent group as well. So from that, if you can still follow me here, we are picking a Born 04 squad, which will play against the Born 03s they'll train against the Born 03s, which are coached by Vedran, and they're preparing for their own World Champs. They'll play in Canberra in late or mid-July, I think it is. And the Born 05 6s, we are trying to organise for them to possibly play in New Zealand in late July. It will be a separate tournament from the older age group. So the camp we've just had 56 athletes, and we won't be announcing a final 04, 05, 6 squad until for another 2 weeks, because I am actually travelling to Perth, and with Andrei Kovalenko, we will have a look at the Perth guys and some of the boys that weren't able to come up to Canberra, and then finally announce a squad to compete both in the Canberra 04 team and the New Zealand 05-06 team.
Okay, so you're happy?
I'm happy with the number of players that we've seen. I'm happy with the identification of players that's occurred. It's been a while. I haven't seen any of these players, most of these players, for 12 months. So the standard's not bad, Minnie. We're just identifying which players can fulfill which positions. As with any generation, you get players. So with the O2, we had some excellent centre forwards, but we were missing in certain areas. With this group now, with the O4s, we haven't got much in the centre forward department, but we've got some very good drivers and goalkeepers. So, yeah, we'll play around. We've got 12 months to work with them.
Okay, that was certainly a detailed report. Thank you. And Phil, what's happening with the girls?
Yeah, something almost similar. We've only had one camp so far, which was Born 2003 camp. So their World Championships is in 2023. At the moment, there's no head coach for that age group, so I went down and ran the camp. We've picked two teams to go to New Zealand. They'll be going from 25th of June to the 1st of July. They're playing in a under 21 year and under national championship over there, and then they'll have 3 days playing games and training against the New Zealand national team. National 21 team. The 04, 05, 06, we're having in 2 weeks' time, Friday week. We've got 79 players coming. Luckily, we've got Taryn, who's in charge of the 05, 06s, and I take the 04s. And we've got a number of coaches coming down, apart from Taryn's 2 assistant coaches and my 2 assistant coaches, which are Scotty and Georgina, Lance and Spindles from Victoria. We've also got Alicia McCormack, who everyone knows. We've got Liz Weeks coming down to look at the goalkeepers, which is fantastic. And Chloe Wilcox, who was an assistant coach for Balmain this year and London Olympian for Great Britain. So from there, we will pick a 2004 team and a 2005 team. Once again, to go to New Zealand for the 18s championships, which are 17th to, I think, the 24th of July. But the main thing for these juniors is going to be national championships in September in Adelaide. That's when the real squad, no, the wrong word, but the ongoing squad working up to World Championships will be picked.
Okay. Charles, what's your role with the juniors? Are you keeping an eye on everything?
Well, that's yes. Well, I don't really have a role with the juniors per se, but I am offering support to Nicola, who is in charge of juniors, and I've had some interaction with Phil and Foxy as well. Look, it's a work in progress. It's my belief we need to do a little bit more work around some of the processes in regards to the junior players and the national age group players, particularly with selections of coaches and things. And we've got a new general manager of learning and development, Katie Fawkes, who started, and part of her role is trying to develop and facilitate coach development. And I had a meeting with her today, and she needs some help as well. So suffice to say, we're all going to get together and try and sort this out with Nicola, myself, Richard, and Katie, and try and work out who's doing what, because it's a bit blurred at the moment.
Okay. And just a reminder to all the viewers out there, at the bottom of your screen there, you'll see your little Q&A box. Press it, and you will be able to ask any of our panel a question, and we'll definitely get it on. Okay. So there it is. You can see it on your screen down there, the Q&A box, and nice looking players too. Very nice, Scotty. And we'll attempt to answer any of your questions. All right, let's go to Clubland very quickly. And during the week, we had a note that Dudi, or Dusan Kristic from the Sydney University Lions, he's the Women's National League coach and former Men's National League coach. There he is. handsome-looking devil you are, Doody. And but unfortunately, he's leaving the club. So at the end of his contract in September, October, he won't be with Sydney Uni anymore. So that's a shame, unless. And I don't know, unless he's got another job that's better. I don't know. But he's been a great servant to the club. Gentlemen, had a lot to do with Doody. He's a very lovable character.
I coached under 18 boys against him, and it was always a war, actually. He wanted to win, but he's a very, very knowledgeable coach. Yeah.
And when I said you had a war with the lovable character, but yeah, when you get to know him, he is a lovable character. Foxy, you had anything to do with him?
Yeah, plenty, Minnie. And the word got out on the weekend that he was leaving, and it was a bit of gossip around the circles at the RAS because we had quite a few Sydney Uni boys there, and it was a bit of shock. But it'll be sad to see him go, and hopefully, if he hasn't already got something lined up, I'm sure that we will see him pop up somewhere with either another club or, at the moment, I think he's committed to Australia.
Well, I hope he is too. Look, I haven't got anything official, but there was some little whisper going around that maybe there could be an opportunity in Western Australia for him. I'm not sure about that, but we'll ask our friend Peter Hughes that. But that's one for the future. Anyhow, good luck to you, Doody, and you'll land somewhere safely, I know. All right. Now, during the weekend, we had the Dive in for DK Day run by the Balmain Club and supported by nearly everybody around the place. A little road bump, Phil, before the day. You couldn't use Balmain. How did it go?
It actually went really, really well. The Inner West Council, who were so helpful, even gave us $1,000. They gave us Leichhardt Oval. And so we had up to 400 people there, and it wasn't just Balmain. There were people from everywhere. There were people I haven't seen for years. Like John O'Cottrell came, Ali Vish came, Thomas Whalen came. There were a lot of the Stingers there. AJ Roach was there. And, it shows what happens when water polo get together and want to do something. It'll be close. We've raised pretty close to $40,000 for this kid, which is unbelievable.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody wants to donate, they can still do it, can't they?
Yeah, it's on Instagram. It's called Dive In for DK.
Right. Okay. Well, get into it, everybody. Right.
Yeah.
40 grand.
And the tournament that we based it on, the Fast Five tournament that we had, I don't know what the end result was, over 40 teams entered. We're actually still going to have it. We're going to have it in September,
Right.
Probably 2 weeks before summer season opens. It's going to be cold, but you're allowed to wear wetsuits. So we'll get a bit more there.
Excellent. Fantastic. Really good cause there. Well done to the Tigers and everybody else who's been supporting it. Okay. Well, now let's get back to our guest, Charles Turner, the high performance manager for Australian water polo. But before that, he was triple Olympian. Charlie, you're an unbelievable player and an outstanding coach too, an Olympic coach and the first coach of the Australian Institute of Sport. So a very decorated career, and it goes on and on and on. Let's go back into time and talk about how you landed in Australia, specifically Adelaide, because you weren't born in Australia. You were, if I'm correct, you were born in Scotland.
Well, actually, no, I wasn't actually. I was born in England, but that's
not correct.
I've seen that the Wikipedia or whatever it is wrong. But anyway, it actually makes me a year younger than I am, so I'm not going to complain about it. I was born in England, and our family emigrated to Australia in the 60s, and myself, my two brothers, and I have a sister as well, all of who played water polo. Many of you will know my brother Michael, of course, but I have an older brother too who played water polo for South Australia too. So and we all started off in Adelaide, and we'd come from from a swimming background, water polo background in Hastings down on the coast in England, where Mick and I, we were old enough to play water polo according to the team. So we used to go down to the shallow end, and he used to go in goal and I used to show the ball at him. So that's how it all started. And so we obviously got very interested in it. When we came to Australia, we found the swimming clubs were a bit too regimented. So water polo was a much more interesting sport for us.
All right. And South Australian water polo, I'm sorry, Phil, South Australian water polo in those days, what was it like?
Well, it was, I guess it was mostly older guys playing, a lot of surf clubs, but they had a history. We had a guy who played in the 1960 Olympics, a guy called Des Clark, and he played for a team called Ethelton. So they had quite a strong team. But they were, as I said, mostly older guys who'd been playing for some time, and we were all very young at the time when we came into it. And so it was a bit of I suppose we were a bit of a change to the sport by bringing younger people into the sport. And we brought with us friends and people from school, and all of a sudden there was a lot more younger kids playing the game.
Charlie, you made your senior debut. You put me off a bit with your age now, but at either 15 or 16 years old, playing against men, and I'm presuming West Australia and New South Wales were the gun teams in those days. Is that a defining experience for your playing career? And just following on, because there's a lot of debate about juniors playing senior polo or senior any sport. What's your opinion on it?
Well, I was 15, Phil, and I and my brother Mick was 16. We made up what was a very young team, South Australians. But I have to say it was a defining moment for me. We were, we obviously battled, and Victoria, New South Wales and West Australia were the strongest teams. And South Australia had an average team, but we were the next rung down with Queensland and Tasmania. And but what was important to us was, as far as getting the understanding of the game, all of the players, particularly the Victorians, were very terrifically helpful to us. They invited us into their homes. They had barbecues for the young kids, and they were terrific. And my memory of people like John O'Brien and Ian Mills and Leon Wiegard, these people really took an interest in us because we were these very young kids playing against the big boys. But we weren't, we could swim all right, but that was about all we could do. And but it cemented, certainly Mick and my view is that this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to play water polo.
And your thoughts on juniors playing seniors?
Look, I think you have to be. I think things have changed a lot since 1968, obviously, and the quality of the teams. I don't want to denigrate the people who were playing at the time, but it was a different game, and we could swim all right, and I suppose that was a bit of a difference from the people who were playing who maybe weren't such good swimmers. These days, everybody swims well, and I think if you allow kids who are too young to be completely outclassed, I don't think it helps them very much, and may actually, apart from the very real fear of injury, it can also dishearten kids, and they think that they may never get to the level that they're playing against.
Charlie, I just picked up on your point there where you said every kid swims well. I think it's another discussion that we can have later on. But I think our swimming advantage is certainly dropping now. With we used to be a very strong swimming water polo nation, but I think we've lost that advantage a little bit. But as I said, a discussion for another time. So you were in South Australia, and then you ended up playing for Sydney University. What prompted the move there?
Oh, well, look, I was fortunate enough to get picked in the national team in 1973 after the national championships in Adelaide, and I went to the World Championships in Belgrade, and obviously got on well with some of the other players, in particular Peter Montgomery, who I already knew. And Peter and I became very good friends. And Peter mentioned to me an opportunity. He was looking to develop a tour of Europe with his team, his university's club team, and said, would I like to come? And of course, I thought, that sounds like fun, going away playing water polo in Europe. And a whole range of other things came up at the same time. My circumstances at home changed, and the opportunity, I decided to leave Adelaide and go to Sydney. And so the obvious place to play was with Peter in universities.
And Mick as well went with you? Or
No,
was that the same one?
No, Mick came later. He didn't come till 75, so he played right through with Adelaide. I think right through to 75 he played in Adelaide, and but then he made the move and moved to Sydney. I think, look, this is the age-old debate about whether you can continue to be a high-standard player playing in a small pond, if you like, without other people around you. And I think it just was very difficult in those days without being able to play against strong competition all the time. So it was an obvious move. So he came, and then he couldn't play for universities, obviously. We had two good goalkeepers, so he went to the opposition, went to Cronulla.
Yeah. And I think there was a time where the national team was made up mostly of Sydney Uni players. Is that right? And you were part of that, obviously, with Monty and...
Well, I think you'd say it was university and Cronulla players, because basically what happened was the state coach, Les Kay, was very proactive with regards to the state team training. So he used to run training every morning at Ashfield Pool, and then you had club training in the afternoons. At weekends there was all state training, and the majority of the people training were people from the Cronulla club and universities club, and then a few from Balmain. So it was only a matter of time, because of the amount of time that we played with each other and against each other. The standard of those teams grew, and so ultimately we ended up with about, I don't know, maybe 10 players from the two clubs.
Charlie, being an old uni man myself, some of my fondest polo watching memories are those uni versus Cronulla classics over the years. And what made them so special? Was just the standard, or the camaraderie, or because it seemed, it was win at all costs and then go and have a beer later on, but the beer came a lot later.
Yeah, no, look, I think it was both, Ian. I think it was both the camaraderie was built up from training together. And of course, once we started to tour a lot together, in the old days, we used to have very long tours, 2 or 3 month tours, and you're sort of living with each other. And it was almost, like you're battling against everybody else. And so you feel a very strong bond to your mates. And of course, when we played each other, there was always that element that we wanted to be better than the other club. And, we always felt sorry for Cronulla coming second all the time. But it didn't matter. They kept battling on.
Charlie, the long tours, how many games would you play on a long tour?
Well, we basically used to play for our supper. In the early days with Tom's Tours, you get we go to places like Germany, you get on a train and you go to the next town, play a game of water polo, and then they'd feed you, and then we'd stay overnight, get on a train and go to another town. We used to play lots and lots of games, and because it was part of they would host you, but they wanted to play against you. And so we played lots of games, and it was a fantastic factory for developing kids, because we were young, we didn't care where we went, and we went to awful places. But it didn't matter because we were playing water polo. So I don't think you could do it these days. You certainly couldn't. I mean, we went to, dangerous places and places that you wouldn't want to go. But but we were invited, so we'd go and we'd play. And I think that it certainly made us pretty tough players.
Charlie, we used to bring out teams like Spandau Berlin, right? Those sorts of days. And they were a great team and whatever. Where do you think that Cronulla and universities rated against those top European clubs in those times?
Well, I think you'd have to say we were pretty close. I mean, if you looked at the national team back in those days, we were, which was collective of both of those teams, with a smattering some West Australians and in those days a couple of Victorians and things. But the reality was we weren't far away from other nations, so the clubs weren't too far away. We had Partizan Belgrade came out one year and who were the world club champions, and I think we ended up 2-2 in the games with them. They won 2, we won 2. So I think we were very competitive.
So Charlie, the playing career of 504 caps for Australia, 3-time Olympian, 76 in Montreal, 11th place, 80 in Moscow, which must have been a hard time, 7th place, and then 84 in Los Angeles, the 5th place. Which Olympics was the most rewarding, given that a number of powerful teams boycotted in LA when you came 5th?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure LA, we actually noticed too much of a boycott. The reality is the Yugoslavs were there, the Americans were there, the teams that weren't there were the teams like the Cubans and the Russians, obviously, but there was still the Germans, lots of very good teams. And I'm not sure that the boycotts either in Moscow or Los Angeles had much influence on the games. Interesting enough, people don't know this, but 34 countries boycotted Montreal. Certainly not from not water polo, but there were 34 countries didn't go to Montreal. So there's always boycotts. So what was the most, from a playing point of view, I always used to enjoy playing the Olympics. There was always something Peter Montgomery once said to me was that he would always make sure that he was ready to play. Mentally, he could tune himself to playing. He knew the first game of the Olympic Games, that way he'd play the best he could right through that. And I took that on, and I used to do the same thing. That was my challenge, to make sure I was absolutely ready to play. I had some successful tournaments, scored lots of goals, very happy about that. But just being part of my first games in Montreal was something rather special. We lost to Hungary in the first game by a goal, and I think it was they beat us 6-5 or 5-4. I think I scored 4 goals, and it was just the crowd just went crazy. And I'll always remember that. It was just it was a standing ovation after the game for this small country, Australia, playing against the doyens of the sport, Hungary. And that was a very special moment for me.
Right. So you might have already answered this by telling us about Hungary. But did we perform to our ability in all those, or was there a couple of hard luck stories? Referees getting in the road.
Yeah, look, to be honest, our team was half a team. We had half a team. We had some very good players, but we had some players who made up the team. They did the best they could, but we were amateur players and we were playing against professionals. And in those days, all the teams, the Hungarians, the Russians, certainly in the early days, they were all very professional. So it wasn't surprising that we would always come up short. And it wasn't until I think we started to become much more competitive towards the end of my career, where we had a much more solid team together. But we still always seemed to fail at the end. And even though we had a good Olympics in Moscow, we beat Italy in the last game, which was a significant result for us. But we always seemed to falter in the big games where we really needed to have a win. And that's something that I was very conscious of when I became a coach, to make sure that we wanted to be competitive in every game and not just be competitive, but also win some of them.
Charlie, I did mention about the swimming, and you were a very hard trainer and a very good swimmer as well. And I suspect you probably still get in the water now and glide through the water. But do you think our current players, and we've got juniors watching this program, what was your attitude towards training, and how important was the swimming part of training?
Well, I think to a certain degree, because of the difficulty we had in getting the goals in the pool, we were sort of restricted a bit to, relying heavily on being a strong swimming team. And you'd probably recall, Foxy, when I first went to Canberra, that it was my view that the way we asked to be competitive was with teams that had better opportunity for technical training than we did, was to really swim up and down very fast. So if teams had to chase us up and down for a while, we had some chance of being able to capitalise on the strengths that we had, as opposed to the lack of technical ability that we might be in the team.
And
what do I think about today's players? Well, I've had the same conversation with Elvis, who believes that we have lost the ability to be able to be as fast. Not all the players, of course. I mean, and Elvis does a lot of work on swimming training as well. But my observation was that there was a change of philosophy post my tenure, and perhaps a couple of coaches after me had the same sort of view. But then there was a change of philosophy, and there was a view that, well, we should play a different way. Interestingly enough, and I know whether it's the right time to talk about it, but I wanted to talk about, which I can do at some other time, about the way that the national women's coach presented to the selectors about what he wanted for his team, which highlights the fact that there is a way that you play. And if I can just briefly go there, when he presented his team, he said, I come from a Baltic background and we play a certain way. And he said, that's not how Australia plays. We have to play a different way. And so when he presented his team, he said, this is the way that I want to play, and these are the players I need to play this way. And when the selection came around, it was pretty simple, because he was able to demonstrate the players he wanted and why he wanted them and the way he was going to play the game. And I think that's a really good message for any coach, is if when you're trying to select a team, you got to work out how you want to play and the type of players you want to get the best out of that team.
It's a really strong message, and it's something that we've talked about with the national coaches discussions, and we talk about the Australian way, and that's exactly what that means, is to play to our strengths as Australia.
Yeah. So if you ask me a question, do I think the kids needed to do more swimming? The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Charlie, your move into from playing into coaching, was that a natural progression for you? Was that always going to happen?
Yeah, I needed a job.
You were a mechanic, weren't you?
No, well, I hadn't. I'd had lots of jobs when I was playing, as most athletes do. You just took whatever job you could. I famously tell people I used to be in ladies' underwear, because at one stage I did sell ladies' underwear. So, yeah, I had lots of jobs, fortunately I ended up working for Peter Montgomery for a while, which was valuable, and I learned a lot. And but when I saw the opportunity, I felt I could actually help, because I was immodest to believe I knew something about the game, and because I'd played a lot of international water polo, maybe I could just shape a team that could play the way that I thought we should play. So that was the logic to jumping into coaching.
Okay, and how did you get the AIS job?
Well, obviously money changed hands. No, no, only joking. I applied, and interestingly enough, I went through an interview process, and I think that having just had a successful playing career didn't hurt, and I had good support. including Peter Montgomery, who was on the board. And but interestingly enough, the interview panel I was on had a really good understanding of what was required to win, to be a good team sport players rather than individuals. And so I was able to demonstrate that I knew what I was doing as far as preparing a team for competition.
Yes, I've had similar support from Peter in my career, so I know what you're talking about. Now, and thank you, Peter. And the AIS program, when you walked into it, you know, I mean, how long did it take for you to get it the way you wanted it?
Well, that's yes. Well, whether I ever got it the way I wanted, I don't know. But look, it was a completely new program, so we'd never had one before. Centralised program. Didn't know whether it could work. I think the opportunity was obviously great because normally when you go to and train at a pool, your club team, you know, you often, you know, some people won't turn up because they've got work commitments and things like that. I had none of those problems. All the kids who were in the squad wanted to be there. They turned up every time we were training. There was no issue with regards to their commitment to the program. And that's a really good thing to have, a very committed squad. Overall, I mean, we had some issues with, in the first year or so, with knowing what to do. And Don Cameron was a big help when I employed Don as the assistant coach. He also became my vocational officer. So he sort of persuaded the kids that while they were there, they should take advantage of the university opportunities that were being offered. And most of them did. Most of them, that was one of the, I think, unheralded parts of the AIS. If you look at most of the boys who went through the program when I was there, the majority of them ended up very well educated and very employable. So not only did they end up good players, but also good people.
Charlie, it must have been hard the first couple of years. I mean, coming in dry. You had full support from everybody around you. And would there be anything you would have done differently looking back now?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure there would have been, but I don't dwell on the past, Phil. I mean, I think look, one of the hardest things I ever had to do once we got going, after 2 or 3 years, whether this was right or wrong, it became accepted if you didn't go to the AIS, your chances of making the national team was going to be reduced. Now, when I look back on that, I think that wasn't right. That's just the way it was. And so having to make difficult decisions at the end of the year with whether a kid would return or not was traumatic, because I recognised, and they certainly recognised, if they didn't get back the next year, their aspirations to play for the national team would be reduced. And very few people who left the AIS ever went on to represent Australia. And that's something that I regret a bit, because we didn't have the system around the time that we could manage the support of the athletes outside of the AIS.
So do we need another centralised system? Or
look, I actually think we could have a centralised system, but not the same system we had before. I think you couldn't do it with senior athletes. You could look at kids who are doing university studies, somewhere between 17 and 20, somewhere around that. You could have a 3-year or maybe 4-year intensive program whereby you would encourage the athletes to come, train full-time, utilise the services of an education facility like a university, get well educated, and I think you could do that. I don't think you could ask, it'd be interesting to get Foxy's view of this, whether you can stay there for 12 or 13 years like they did in the early days. But for me, I had no option. I felt, as the national coach, if I didn't have control of these kids being able to manage their daily training environment, we wouldn't get to where we wanted to go. That was my feeling. Whether it was right or wrong, I don't know.
You asked.
Sorry, if you had the option, would you go back to Canberra or would you find somewhere else?
Would I?
Yeah.
You mean if we were going to set one up there?
Yeah.
Well, I think Canberra is, the facilities at Canberra are very good. The universities are all very close to the campus. You can move around very quickly. I think for a range of reasons, it's a good option because there's not the same distractions as there would be in a place like the Gold Coast or something. So it has its attractions. It's not perfect. The weather's not great, things like that. But I'm not so sure that if you had a centralised program, as I said, 3-year program, 17-year-olds, I think you could. It would be I think you could do it in Canberra. The obvious place would be where the weather's better to go north, but I'm not sure there has. Maybe the Gold Coast is another place you could do it.
Yeah, Charlie, and you threw the question to me. You're describing exactly what basketball do now with their Centre of Excellence program. And I think one of the issues was when you did decide to cut players from the AIS, they didn't have the support network with a National League club or there was no pathway to turn to, whereas with the juniors, they can go back to their states. So, or National League, or there's other pathways as well with Europe and America.
Yeah, well, that's right, and there just wasn't, and I remember we were criticised by, I remember the very famous Queensland figure at one stage said it's not fair. You guys train harder than us, and so that's not fair. And I said, okay, fair enough. But the reality was that it was difficult. Because we were training, you'd recall, at a very high level and quite intense, and you just couldn't replicate that anywhere else.
So, Charlie, in your years as a national team coach, we all have some ups and downs and that. Can you take us through some of your fondest and maybe worst memories?
Oh, well, obviously the worst memory is an obvious one. We were supposed to qualify for the 96 games. The previous year, we'd won the Tungsten Cup, which is the top 10 teams in the world, and we were just about the best team in the world. We get to play in Berlin in the middle of winter, basically, and didn't perform. And we should have qualified, and we didn't. So that's the worst moment, obviously, because that basically defined in my mind that was the end of my coaching career, really. And fond memories, well, I remember we won a medal in 1991 at the World Cup. That was a pretty good result. I enjoyed most of the time I was coaching. I found it frustrating a couple of times where being the national coach and the AIS coach, in particular, I have a memory of when played in the World Championships in Perth. And in my view, we were dudded by the referees in the last game, where we ended up having a draw where we should have won. I felt we got the worst end of the refereeing. That can happen, and I was very upset about that. But the next day, I had to be back in Canberra coaching the AIS, and that was just a very tough gig to have to go back the next day and forget about the fact that we'd been cheated, and I felt really upset about it, but I had to go back because I had a job to do. So I think that in retrospect, being the national coach and the AIS coach was a big ask.
Right. So Barcelona must have been a highlight as well, 5th place.
Yeah, I think we played pretty well there. We had some interesting games. We just didn't play as well as we should have done in the big games, but beating Hungary in the last game was a highlight. I mean, they were, as you know, they're world renowned as a water polo nation. Beating them in the last game for 5th place was pretty good.
Yeah. So I know we'll run out of time sooner or later, but changing the topic a little bit, a lot of people don't know you started the National League. When you started it, do you think it'd still be going in 2021?
Oh, I hoped it would. I mean, because of the reason for starting it hasn't changed. We needed to provide better opportunities for national standard players to continue to play for a longer period of time in Australia before they went overseas to represent their country in international competition. So we targeted the timing of it was directly pitched at trying to provide a time for the athletes to continue to play at a high level, so that when they got on the team as on the plane as a national team player, we didn't get to Europe and were completely outclassed because we hadn't played any games. That hasn't changed in my view, and we actually had this conversation at the weekend, Phil, if you recall, where my objective of talking to the group was we still need to have more games more often and high intensity. Nothing's changed in my view.
Yeah, so basically that's how you'd improve on what we've got at the moment. More games, more high intensity.
Yes, and I think that one of the ways we will have to consider in the future is that it's all very well for every team wanting to play, but we need to enable us to have the standard we want. We might have to be more selective in the teams that are playing, or we have some sort of group type arrangement where the best teams play against each other and the second tier plays against each other, things like that, which we talked about at the weekend, and possibly they'll come eventually. But I believe that unfortunately, the way that we're heading from a economic point of view, the National League has become even more important to the national programs because we will have less opportunities to travel. And so we have to make sure that we have the best quality competition in Australia so that we can provide that to our aspiring national players.
Yeah. Charlie, I've just got a question that's come in from the audience and probably goes back to the Olympic selections, and I know the answer, but I'd love you to give it to us. They asked what is the process of how you select a representative team, especially if one of the selectors has a conflict of interest? And I know there's a process. Yeah.
Yes, there is a process. So obviously there is a national selection policy which determines that, and it covers the issue of a perceived or even real conflict of interest. And the person who declares a conflict of interest has no part in the selection process for that particular athlete.
Yeah. So can you elaborate how many selectors are there?
There's three selectors. There's the general manager of performance, that's me. We have an independent selector and we have the national coach. And in the case where there is the potential for a conflict of interest, we either have an independent coach or an assistant coach or another member of the coaching panel will stand in for the for the person who's seen to have a conflict of interest.
Okay, we're a small sport. It's happened through the ages that people have, had relatives and whatever involved at a high level. So it keeps on going. Okay, back to you, Charlie. You ended up being the CEO of NSwiss. That wasn't a bad gig. Going from the AIS's head coach to running, many programs. How did you find that?
Well, it was interesting transition. I knew that really after '96, I knew that my time was up as coaching. Not everyone can coach, I think, forever. I never saw myself as a coach when I was 60. I always saw myself as coaching for a while and then getting into something else. I'd always had an interest in administration. I had applied for a role within the Sports Commission, and which I didn't get, but the then head of the AIS came to me and offered me an opportunity as a high performance manager with canoeing. So before the 2000 games, so that was in fact in 1997. And in 1997, they offered me the opportunity to head up the high performance program for canoeing. And I was interested in it. And then he said, it's in Sydney. And my wife said, let's go. So she was the one that sort of determined where I was going. She'd had enough of Canberra. And so we decided to go. And working for canoeing, I was working in those days, they had boards of the Sports Commission and the institutes put in boards to help sports develop their programs towards the 2000 games. And my board had the head of the institute, newly developed institute in New South Wales, a guy called Michael Scott. After about 6 or 7 months, he spoke to me about an opportunity he had in the institute. Would I be interested in coming in as basically his 2IC? And I said, sure. So I moved in then, and that was before in 1998. And in 2000, we went through the games. In 2001, Michael went off and to take another job, became head of the AIS. I was then the deputy director for about 18 months before becoming the first CEO in 2003. Yeah, look, it was I was lucky. I think I was in the right place. Worked to a board who were very supportive. We had lots of fights with the government, so you need a board. And we really wanted to make a difference to the athletes, and that's what I tried to do as the CEO. I really was interested in trying to help athletes to be better, and that included water polo, of course.
Charlie, I think you've undersold yourself there, because I know as when you were at the AIS as the head coach, and we would walk into the water polo office and there would be coaches from other sports and you'd be engaging with them in basketball, netball, volleyball, didn't matter who it was, but you were making professional connections all the time. And for you to progress your professional journey, I think came about as because of your ability to make those connections. And you said you worked for the athletes. You did. It wasn't just water polo. You had a good care for athletes across the board. And the respect that you got from other sports, you put water polo in the light, and people started to understand that water polo wasn't just a sport that appeared every 4 years at the Olympics.
Well, that's kind, Foxy. I hope it's true, but I always tried to. I've always been a water polo person at heart. Notwithstanding, I spent 20 years out of it and was drawn back in because of my passion for it. But look, as I said, to me, it's always been about the athletes. And I try to, we did it tough when we played before your time. And I tell the story about taking a loan to go to the first World Championships, which took me 10 years to pay off. So we wanted to make it better for the athletes. So make it easier and less difficult for them to be successful. So I hope I had a hand in being able to do that.
And Charles, we were given all sorts of dire financial predictions for the men's program and to a lesser extent the women's program, right? And was it all a bit gloom and doom a little while ago? And then all of a sudden, 2032, the Brisbane Olympics. How good would that be for water polo?
Oh, look, I think it'd be tremendous. And I think to a certain degree, we're pinning our hopes on 32. We hope that people will see the light. I don't think, and look, it's no secret, so I'm not telling you anything that I haven't said in other company. I don't think the Sport Australia has done a particularly good job over the last 3 years of managing the investment that they have into sports. And I think that's had the effect of reducing the opportunities for sports. Now, you mentioned we are running into a difficult time financially. Both the men's and women's team are it's being suggested we'll lose money just because of the investment model that they're using. There's a whole range of reasons why they perceive that the men look like getting quite a savage cut, and the women also, which is ridiculous, but they also will receive a cut. So we're just going to have to struggle on and do the best we can. But I think there needs to be a change of attitude towards the way that the sports are supported. And I'm not talking about the fact that if sports can't be successful, well, you can't be successful. But I think there should be more weight given to trending. Now, by anyone's measure, if you look at our women's team, they've always been trending towards winning a medal, and they've won lots of medals. So to suggest that they're not worth supporting or worth supporting less than they currently are doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think and right at the moment, there is I suppose, a groundswell of support for change, and I'm certainly right in the thick of trying to have our say with those changes.
Got to turn yourself on, Phil.
Sorry. We've got another question from Tony Hardy, which you probably just answered, but he just simply, how is funding going for the men's program?
Well, we don't know exactly. We're up until June next year, we're on the same money that we are this year. But after June of 2022, the understanding is we'll probably receive quite a hefty cut, possibly 50% of our funding.
Right. So can I just follow up that, because everyone knows the women get a lot more money than the men. So what does the staff look like for each program? I mean, I tend to go and watch see women training, and there's a lot of people there.
Yeah, well, so part of it though, you've got to remember, not all the staff is paid for by AWP. So we have been fortunate enough to be linked to state institutes, which have helped with the costs around those sorts of things. For example, the women's team obviously has more resources, so they have a full-time physio, they have a full-time PA person for performance analysis, and then they have 3 coaches in the national team, and but the PA comes from NSWIS, and so we partially fund that position. And in the past, we had a guy who also looked after strength and conditioning, and that was a position from NSWIS who we partially funded. So none of these positions are full-time, but we partially fund them. So they provide us with very good service. It could be 0.5, 0.6. So, and the men's team have a physio, and once again, he's a 0.5 or something like that. So the men contribute to that. We have a PA, performance analysis. He once again is a part-time position linked to a state institute, and they both have managers, operational managers, and so that's basically it. And so, you know, these days you need quite a bit of support if you want to be a successful international team, because they take, when they travel, they have the PA person and they have the physio, and when they're at home, most of the dry land training is done by a professional. So whether they need them all, well, that's a debatable point, but that's what they've got at the moment. But we'll look differently in 2022. From the mid-year, we won't be able to afford the same sort of support.
I'm allowed one more serious question. I've got about 20 here, but it's 3 years to the next Olympics and 1 year to the next Worlds. What plans do we have in place leading up to there? Or can we have plans not knowing what funding we got?
Well, no, look, we know that we'll be funded. We know what we've got till next year. So the World Championships are May. So we've obviously got funding to do that. What it will mean, though, is that going forward, rather than in the past, the men have been able to travel 2 or 3 times to Europe sometimes when they play in World Leagues or Continental Cups and World Championships. The likelihood of that is very much reduced with reduced funding. And it's more likely we'll revert back to the way we used to travel, which is to get on a plane and go for a long trip, which ends at the World Championships, and then come home. So basically one trip. So longer trips rather than the shorter trips, which costs much more money, and prevailing upon our relationships with the European countries to host us.
Charlie, the whistleblower is for referees as well. And can you give us just your evaluation of the Australian referees at the moment, where we're sitting internationally? We've got some good internationally recognised referees, but also you saw the Cap 7 Cup, which was in Sydney. It replaced the AWL. How do you think the referees are going at the moment?
Oh, look, I think it might be unfair of me to make a judgment with watching one tournament, really, to be honest, and that's about all I've seen. And I've watched some of the, training games and things, but reality is that I think under the circumstances, I think the K7 Cup was really good. And other than the last game, which I think got out of control a bit, I thought that mostly pretty good. What I did like, and I've already paid tribute to Phil about this, was the way that you guys were able to provide feedback to referees. I think, honestly, think that that's one of the things that are missing. And I know it's a question of manpower and being able to do it, but giving feedback to the referees, as a coach would give feedback to a player, is very important, because how do they learn otherwise? So I was very impressed, I thought, with what Phil ran in the K7. And notwithstanding, one referee ended up not refereeing another game after having not done as well as he would like to do. That's no bad thing. I think people learn from that. So, look, I think there's a bit of work to be done here. And we've got a committee that Phil's on. And my view is that Phil should take actually control of some of this. And he's on the right track, which is provide opportunities for referees to be with national teams, travel with national teams, come to AWL games, the highest standard they can get, and do it as often as you can. I think refereeing and coaching is two different ways of looking at it. Referees need to learn the rules and then learn the interpretation of the rules. And to do that is to referee games and have someone who helps them to develop their skills.
Charlie, you're going to help with our next episode, because we're asking people one question. I know you haven't seen a lot of polo, but which rule don't you really understand?
Oh, most of them, Phil.
Yeah, but no, the last person we had on, we asked the same question there, and she said, I don't understand what's happening at centre forward, and really got no idea when a penalty is and when a penalty isn't.
Well, I know what a penalty is, but the reality is, I mean, my whole life has been trying to work out what happens at centre forward. I mean, who knows? And it's a lottery, and you're a better man than I if you can work it out. But the reality is, I think if you can referee, and I'm of a view that we should try and make the game a little lighter than some of the wrestling games. I understand the finals in the Italian league were all in wrestling, and I mean that doesn't help anybody in my view. So trying to make it a more attractive game by not making it so heavy, I think would be a good thing.
Okay, Charlie, it happens all the time. We run out of time. These are one-word answers, unless we ask you to embellish. The best player that you ever played with, including your brother.
In the same team, you mean?
Yes.
Probably Andrew Kerr.
Yep, thought you might say that one.
You want the worst? Oh.
No, I don't want the worst. I could name you a few. The best player that you played against?
I thought there was a couple. I thought Bebic was a very good player, the Yugoslav, and Bela Martic, both very good players, or probably Farago when it comes down to it.
Okay.
The Hungarian.
Big names there. The best pool in Australia to play at?
Well, I don't know whether it's the best pool to play at, but I think the Gold Coast pool is fantastic. The Gold Coast one, I was up there recently, for the training camp for the boys. It's a fantastic venue.
Okay. Beer or cocktail?
Oh, cocktail. Martini, thank you.
Hey, times have changed. Okay. Charles Turner, the high performance manager for Australian Water Polo. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Whistleblower. We appreciate your time and thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, all of you.
And Phil, Foxy, thank you guys. Noel and Scotty in pre-production. Thank you guys. It's been a very, very enlightening program, and we'll do it all again in about another fortnight, Phil, I understand.
Yeah, another fortnight. Let's hope Danny can get to the Gold Coast and come back with some stories.
Good luck. Good luck at the Masters, all of you, and good luck anybody who has a drink with Daniel. Well, that's you, Foxy. That's right, who has a drink with Daniel, right? I escaped that a couple of weeks ago. Thanks again for being with us on the Whistleblower. We'll see you soon.